Hello to everybody. We will start, and Maria Grazia will follow. No reply on the message, so I think she's coming here or she's lost somewhere in the maze of this big fair. Thank you for coming here. It's an honor for me. I'm Pierdomenico Baccalario. I'm a writer, and today I will be here as a moderator of this little discussion. We have a very sensitive topic, so please don't be rude. And it's a pleasure for me to try to help you and me to understand better what is happening or what will be happening in the next future in this peculiar moment of the children literature, and furthermore perhaps in the entire entertainment industry. It's a pleasure for me to introduce you and on my right to Beverly Horowitz, Senior Vice President Delacorte Press Random House. Thank you for coming to be here. Pleasure. Applause, please. On my left, Simona Mambrini, translator of a lot of children literature, I have to say, from Jules Verne, Saint-Exupéry, from French and from English into Italy. And now in the last couple of years, perhaps, I don't know, a coordinator of the translator for the Bologna Book Fair. 20 years, couple 20. That's the moderator. Yeah, the moderator is still missing the point. And then there is Davide Morosinotto, Italian author, bestseller author, published by her. And that a couple of weeks ago made a post on the internet with his position on a question, and he was bombarded by a lot of angry comments on what you said, and we will have time to explain your position. That is very interesting. Thank you for coming, Davide. And then we are waiting for Maria Grazia Mazzitelli from Salani, chief editor of Salani, and the Italian publishing house who publish in Italy, Roald Dahl. And question on Roald Dahl only for her, please. Okay. Beverly, if you want to start, I think that the most important things to say at the beginning is that we are in a moment in which they are very important to talk about sensitivity, in particular of sensitivity readers. So how much are they important now? How much they are, because they are not so much in terms of numbers of readers, or they are. Right. And so how they role in the publishing industry now?
Okay, thank you. I'm speaking in English. I wish I spoke Italian, but I do not. So now in the United States, the editor acquires a manuscript. Is that better?
Yeah, you have to bite it in a way.
I have to bite it.
Yeah, bite it, please.
Afraid of that manuscript and that little thing. So an editor acquires a manuscript. And when you acquire a manuscript, you are already making a statement. You like what's on the page. You like the ideas written by that creative talent. And you want to bring it beyond that author and you out into the world for young people, for adults, not just for 1 year, but for a long-term commitment to educating, entertaining, inspiring children. But it doesn't come in perfect. A manuscript never comes in perfectly written. There's the relationship between the author and the editor and the process of editing, making it a better manuscript, a stronger manuscript. But when you get to the end of that process between the editor and the author, often, depending on the topic, there's a conversation about have the author and the editor achieved everything that might be possible on those pages to be as wide open to what may or may not have been caught, not to censor, but to understand the changing world and how things are seen. Because often there are biases. You don't mean a bias to hurt anyone. You don't mean for a bias to inflict any pain or any, in fact, aggression. You think you've got it. You've worked with that. As an editor, I work with an author to get the best book possible. And yet, sometimes you and the author might have missed something, or maybe you didn't. If I'm editing a book about a topic that, even in fiction, is something that I only know a limited amount about, even if I've explored much about that topic, sometimes we hire a sensitivity reader. Now, that's one person. One person.
Yeah. Only
one person. That person says, I'm an expert on this topic, whatever that topic is. Often the new orientation is to have someone who's dealing with some of the new sensitive issues, from sexuality to racism to anti-Semitism to a wide variety of how people are portrayed and interact. And so you ask someone else to read the book, someone who says, oh, I understand this topic. And then you pay that person to read the book, and you get a report from that person, and that report says whatever it says. And the author and I, let's say, we don't have to accept everything, but it's often interesting. And that person can say, well, did you realize that you said this about that? And that could be seen as offensive. And the author often says, well, I never meant that. I didn't mean that. I think that sensitivity reader is interpreting it the wrong way. That's a really wrong way. But at least it's been acknowledged that there's one reader out there who feels you're not on top of this. Mm-hmm. And so then we have a discussion. Now, this is all before the book is published. This is not censorship. This is part of the editing process, right? How many in the room are authors? How many are publishers? How many are great readers? Okay? As a reader, when you're reading a manuscript, when you're reading a book, do you ever say to yourself, what is happening here? Right? And it doesn't have to be about one of, the more sensitive issues I just mentioned. It might be a psychological implication. You might say to yourself, that character would never do that. That's your sensitivity to the way you are reading. And so everybody has an opinion. You can have the opinion as a reader. And then you can say, I love this book, or I hate this book. Nobody should read this book. I'm giving it to everyone I've ever met. Okay? But when I am in the process of dealing with the issues that have been raised, it's different, because I haven't put the book out into the world yet. And once it's out in the world, my feeling is it should not be changed. It's out there after we've made all these discussions about that we feel it is on target. So this is a long answer to say sensitivity readers do not censor, in my view. They point out from their view of whatever their expertise is, something that may or may not be on the page. And then we discuss it. And I do feel that oftentimes it is helpful. It is helpful. Because you yourself might say something to your family or in your friends or at work, and you didn't realize that what you said came off in a way that was not as you intended it to be. And that is often what happens. It is very hard to write a book. It is very hard for every word to be perfect, to reflect everything you want it to say. And so authors deal with editors. Editors are now asking an outsider to give an opinion, not to censor, to state issues that may or may not be there for others to see. And that's part of what I believe is an open discussion about understanding the changing way people perceive these particularly difficult topics, or even more limited topics, but that have had the importance of the discussion. So yes, we in the United States often use sensitivity readers, and I think they have been helpful to open discussions.
Thank you, Beverly, for the answer. Very, very interesting. So you're an editor, and here we have an author. And so I want you to listen from you your opinion on editing and what happens when start this discussion between your original text and what is proposed by an editor in order to improve your text, or if you are not happy, or sometimes in your life you were not happy of something, what you did and what your point of view.
From a writer's perspective point of view, okay.
Bite.
From a writer's perspective, a writer point of view, texts are not carved into stone. They are just something on my laptop, and since they are words on my laptop, they can be changed. And as you know, because you are a writer too, many of you are writers, the text is something that's living and it's changing during the process of writing, rewriting, correcting, and then publishing. I've never read one of my books when it's published. It's on paper, because in a way, when my book is on paper, it's not mine anymore. I've read 100 times when I still can change it. So that's my position. It's a teamwork. Usually when I have a new idea, I discuss it with my friends, like you, Pierdomenico, perfectly know. We discuss together. I would like to write this story. Can you help me? Do you have a better idea? Can you help me? Then I usually write my own story. And then a lot of people contribute. The sensitivity reading is one of this kind of contribution. For me is usually very helpful, just because I must know what I'm doing on the page. And it's not easy sometimes to know what your story is telling to other people, because you have just your perspective, but it's yours, and it's not the ideas that your readers could have. Maybe because they are of different minorities, or they can have different cultural backgrounds, and so having someone that points out, hey, pay attention, maybe this thing is out of character. Once I wrote the story of a young boy that's homosexual, and the editor told me it's out of character because we are in the past, and so he can't have this kind of consciousness because it was a different time. And I told him, yeah, you're right. The story isn't working very much because this is a mistake on my side, and I change it. Change it doesn't mean I made him heterosexual, but I changed the way I told that story because it must be right for the time the story was told. And so that's my position. Usually a book is a discussion thing, and we try to I usually try to find a team I can trust. That's why, like, I work with Pierdomenico since 15 years now, maybe 20, because now I trust him. And it doesn't mean we agree on everything, like on this topic we usually have very different opinions, but I trust his judgment. And I know he can contribute. If I don't like my team, then on the next novel I change team, usually. But if you trust your team, you must do them, let their part.
Thank you, Davide. Very interesting. Simona, after the process of publication, you come with your job, the translation. The book is published and he has to be adapted in another language. Can you add something in the discussion on this topic, and something has changed in your job during the last years, better or not, or whatever?
Yes, when all this debate came out about Roald Dahl case, it's just something I just make me think about the fact that it's editing. We're talking about editing, okay, in the publishing industry, and editing is what we as translators do constantly. We have a book, we have an original book, and we have to adapt it, to transfer it, to transport it, to make it travel in another language, in another culture, and so we are changing constantly words. But we have from the starting point is the author's word. So in the 80s. There was a book published in the translation studies field called, the title was The Manipulation of Literature Studies in Literary Translation. So translation was considered as a sort of manipulation of literature. Now the thing is that made me think that if the manipulation of literature shifts to the original text, we'll, in a moving sense, we don't know where to do about it. Having said so, the translators come afterwards, all the process of editing and all the fact checking as well. Sometimes is the translators who's the best fact checkers, because many things don't get picked up by the original edition. So I have just only questions, not answers. And what I'm trying to say is, what shall we do with the original text when the author is not there to agree with the changes, and also talking about classics, because we're talking about the editing process for books that are to be published with the authors. We need fact-checking. You have to write a book. You do your research. You do your homework, and because you have to know what you're talking about, what you're writing about. But with the book from the past, what shall we do with them?
Ta-da-dam. It's up to you, Maria Grazia. A couple of years ago, you told me that if a manuscript of Roald Dahl come to your publishing house nowadays, it should be difficult to publish it exactly how it is, for a lot of questions and reasons. What are the reasons it's very difficult now to publish a book like the Roald Dahl's one, and
well, I understand what I told.
Are we missing something or not?
I can say a publisher, the reason why, in my opinion, the reason why nowadays a publisher exists and makes sense, especially in a world where you can publish what you want everywhere on the net, so you are free really to put something. This has changed a lot the way of our do. So it's sense and sensitivity relies on me, on the publisher. It's the publisher who chose and decided if a text is a piece of literature and cannot be changed, or is something, it's like a thread. It's like if you touch a cloth. If it is silk, you don't touch silk. You don't add a thread of synthetic and it's in the sense of a publisher to understand where is the difference if a text is a commercial text or not only a commercial, a text which is in the air, in the sense of a country for a certain period, or is something that you think can resist and is a masterpiece or a classic in the future. So the role of a publisher becomes more important, in my opinion.
Thank you, Simona. Grazia. Very, very interesting. Beverly, the publisher has the role of choosing and working on a text before the publication. Can you explain us something about the marketing idea that it's very interesting of the own voices? What are our own voices and why are so important and increasingly important, I can say?
Sure.
Thank you.
I think it's become evident to many people that others should not speak for groups that are able to speak for themselves. Okay. And so the expectation now is that authors of color, LGBTQ authors should write about their experiences. The question then is, well, what about imagination? What about my imagination? Can I not experience other things? Aren't I empathetic? And yet, as much as the imagination can capture a wide variety and should do that as someone is writing, the own voices, as we're now calling this, often can dig somewhat more deeply about the experience. And more than ever, people are looking to hear the experience from the original voice. In the US, there's a conversation, I don't know if it's happening here, it's called Windows and Mirrors. What is the difference between a window and a mirror? And that is, often kids are reading more about themselves. And that is a book that in some ways is a mirror of their own lives. And then there are books that are windows into a world or into people. I'm sorry.
It's the bite.
The bite, okay. It's looking into a world that you don't know. It's somebody else's world that you can easily or find yourself empathizing with, but it's from the real voice. It's not my imagination making up this experience. And certainly that would have some value. I won't deny that. But the expectation now is that the kinds of things that are available are more easily available so that there's a reality. It's not just if only, or this is somebody else's life as I see it. It's this is a life that I've led and I'm sharing it with you. And your experience of talking about the gay characters that you said you weren't in that context as authentically talking about, today, certainly in the US, the experience of including characters who are not you would be examined quite deeply so that you don't, unfortunately, present something that's not particularly real for those kinds of moments for people's lives. So that's part of it, I think. Authentic for reality.
Good, thank you. And so, the ball is on you. How important for a writer to be on a side, completely free to write of everything and everywhere and all at once? Sorry, as quotation. And on the other side, for a reader to trust to what is written on the book.
Okay. I think I have another unpopular opinion on this. I don't care much about writers, including myself, because we're just people, and we can do something good and something wrong, and we're not very important. And I think it's very important, the story. The story is king, and I think, or queen. I don't know the gender of stories, maybe both. And I think that stories must be honest. And I think that me as a writer, I must provide a story that's more honest. It must be as honest as possible. And sometimes this means I can't tell such things. Like, an example. I can have a character that's homosexual, of course. I did that. But I would be a bit embarrassed to write a story about a homosexual guy that's thinking about his particular situation and his love stories and relationships, because I am afraid I probably wouldn't be very honest, because I haven't tried that thing. There are several things I feel I can say honestly, as much as I can, and some other that are too difficult. And so, for me, that's the limit. I can be authentic saying this thing. Sometimes it's part of my job to do experiences that provide me things that I can tell in my stories. I've written a book set in prehistory, and I lived as a prehistoric man for some days, living alone among the mountains and sleeping under the sky in the nights, in the woods, because it was the only way to provide you the real thing. I have tried it. It's different than you thought. And I've tried it, and that's the only way. Other things are probably so different that for me they would be impossible, and it's okay. It's okay like that.
Thank you, Davide. Simona, in your job of translations, there is a difference between when you have to translate a text or something that they're thinking for children, or if it's not for the children, so is for adult market or whatever. So there is a difference in your job where you're doing this. Have you in mind that there are young readers on the other side, and there is something that is important?
Okay, well, of course, there's no difference in translation for adults or young readers. It's just that the children's books are meant for a target reader. It's their age that set the issues, the topics, and the language you have to use and you have to adapt to use. Obviously, in translation, and you have to have the same accuracy and authenticity of the authors of the words of the original text. And so we too do our research. We test young people. How do you say that? How do you speak? Which the language changes. 10 years ago, 20 years ago, young people didn't talk like today. And I have an age in which I certainly don't talk like 17, 18, 16-year-old, but still I can do my job doing my research and checking it. We have our readers as well. We have our experts, linguistics experts, teenagers or smaller children, and you test on them books. So this is the difference. And yes, you have to to choose the right words, but you are guided. You're guided by the authors. You can't change things because the mainstream language is changed. It depends on what the authors, the intentions of the authors were. So it's more difficult to translate for children and young adults as it is, because there are several issues to be taken into account, and the publisher's pressure sometimes, because the publisher wants this book to be treated in a particular way, or stressed in a way which is not so violent as in the original, for example. Here comes the role of the publisher, which has the final word on the book.
Final word on the book, Maria Grazia. The most successful books of Davide, it is the Walker and Down, I don't know the translation, Walker and Down catalog. And when I brought this book to you a lot of years ago, you told me, not you, Luigi told me, it's excellent, it's a great story, it's like Mark Twain, but we have difficulties to sell Mark Twain. And so you didn't want that book. So Davide is right. You have to change the language to say the same story, and also Tommaso de Lampedusa, perhaps.
I mean, you are right. Luigi was right too. Where sometimes publishers are wrong because they look after the market, which I am in charge of doing that, of course, because as you know, you personally know, if I could, I'd publish all Russian books which nobody reads. So, you know, I must cope with the readers' tasters. And in those moments, probably Luigi told you about this because Mark Twain was a classic and was an established book. So with
it was silk.
It was silk, okay. Definitely silk. Yes. So sometimes it happened that, but you know, in Salani it happened many times that Luigi or me, we decided just to risk or something, sometimes also unconsciously says, go on in this direction, and you were right. You were right with success, not only commercial success, but I mean books which became classic in the years, and in our catalogs there are so many. Which were made by all of us, I can say. So it's a strange mixture, but publishing is a wonderful adventure also for this reason.
Thank you, Margaret.
I miss that book in your book in my catalogs. I know.
You're trying to rejoin
but I have time
okay.
Yes, I think soon.
Yeah. You think? Okay. It will be a Western. Okay. Beverly, what's important? You talk about reality before, and it's very interesting. What's the important, if it is, in the connection between novels, books, and children, or entertainment, if you want, and the reality? In other ways, we keep, as a publishing industry, a lot of attention on using the right words, avoid violence, try to be inclusive, into the children's stories, protect them in a way, and then outside, not you, but politics and the wars, I don't know, they sell guns.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah. Isn't a little bit schizophrenic? It's better to protect the children from the reality, or tell them better what reality could be?
Yeah, I think we have to deal with the story unto itself. And I can think of a book that I personally edited, that the editing in the book, it's a young adult book that has a moment where a number of the children die. And I think a number of, and many readers are shocked at that moment. The house burns down, they don't get out, they're dead. And someone said to me, well, how did you let that happen? And I said, what are you talking about? That's the construction of this novel. That's what happens. Of course, it's a work of fiction, but part of the reading of this book is to unravel the response of many people to this tragedy. So I don't think we can keep away the tragedies of life from children. I do have one rule, and I agree with you 100%. When you translate or when I edit, there's no difference between the skills that we use for adult or young adult or children's books. We use the same skills. My one rule is that, as honest as a book might be, there should be some hope at the end. Some hope. A little bit, but something. And the difference for me is that children are still growing and learning and do not have the adult experience of facing hopelessness alone. And so that's the only thing that in the darkest books, there should be some sense of hope, of a future, of a connection, of resilience. It's not necessarily a happy ending, here we are, everything's going to be perfect, because that's not life. For some, but not for everybody. But I do think, yes, there are people in the United States, horrifyingly, you can get a gun. It's shocking and awful to wake up in the morning and read the newspapers that in different parts of the United States, some kid goes into a school and shoots his classmates or his teacher. How did that happen?
A teacher, I can.
Teacher. How? But we're not teaching kids to do that in books. No book says, here's what you do. No. So kids, I think, want to be treated with respect. They do not want to be patronized. They do not want anyone to tell them, it's going to be fine, just don't even think about it. You can do that to your own children if you want. That's fine, because they have other ways of connecting with you. But by and large, you're talking about honesty, you're talking about the integrity, you're talking about the choice that you make as a publisher. That is what we have to do. Put all those things together and hope for the best books out in the world, and that some kid who knows what that kid has experienced finds a book, reads the book, and says, wow, I am not alone in the world, or this book makes me happy. The power of the book. That's what we do.
Thank you, Beverly. I think that Beverly will not buy your last answer, Davide, sorry. That's sad, that was for me.
I can survive.
Yeah. Davide, can you explain better your position on the question of the re-editing or proposed re-editing of Roald Dahl, and what's happened after you published? What have you published and what happens, please?
Okay, please don't kill me. I've already received hundreds of insults for my ideas, so I know I'm probably wrong. I'm getting along with this, and so please be patient. My idea is that stories during time, as the years pass by, have only two choices: to be retold, to be adapted to the present, or to die and be forgotten. And so I think that, but that's my opinion, and you won't like it probably, is preferable to be changed than to die and be forgotten. It doesn't mean we have to forget originals. Of course, I think that the original version of a story must be kept, put in libraries, and people must have access to them, because otherwise we would forget our past. But, Snow White. Everybody in this room knows Snow White, and probably a lot of you have never read the original version of Snow White, also because there are several original versions during the centuries, and you usually know that Snow White eats an apple and finishes in a glass tomb, but you probably have forgotten that Snow White kills his mother in the end by making her dance with iron shoes. So Snow White tortures her mother, and let her die in front of her eyes. And you probably have forgotten this part because it's quite strange for us, and it's a little bit, disgusting also. And so this is it. I think that for me the idea between be adapted, be retold, kept alive. In 1 century, I prefer to have a lot of kids that love Roald Dahl's Willy Wonka and the Healthy Carrots Farm than having kids that say, Roald Dahl who? I've never heard of him. In this choice, if this is the choice, I prefer the Health Carrots. Because the alternative, in my opinion, is, blackness. After I said this on Facebook, I received, as I told you, hundreds of insults, a couple of interesting suggestions. What surprised me was that many fans of Roald Dahl say, let him be forgotten. For me, it's preferable. And I didn't expect that. I'm still thinking about it because I have no proofs my position is better or the right one. So I'm still thinking of it.
Thank you for Davide. Brave.
Yeah. Sorry, don't kill me, please. I have family.
Simona, what's your opinion on this matter? Sorry, we have to.
I have to say something.
Yeah, if you want.
Okay. Well, I think fairy tales are different than authorial books. Fairy tales are shared imagination, are constantly retellings of a story. There are several versions, so I wouldn't make a comparison which doesn't stick. We are talking about authoriality, so let's say it, because it's this we are talking about. So it's the position of Philip Pullman was like the same. Let them fade away. If you don't like Roald Dahl books, just don't read them, let them fade away. Read better authors, modern authors, but if you want to keep the authors from the past, and I talk about authors, not stories that you can change, or you can make an adaptation as it's always been done, but I think the next book to be criticized will be, it just happens to as it happens, I'm doing the new translations of Mary Poppins books, which we have an expert on Mary Poppins in the room. And Mary Poppins 2, Travers 2, was heavily criticized for her positions. But if you read the opening of Mary Poppins, opens the door, just one, the two characters, the cook, Mrs. Brill, and the Ellen, the waitress, they use words to. There's a sweep. He is black. For the suit is not black, but is because of the suit is covered in his black, constantly described as black, and is called Hottentot. But if that Hottentot goes into the chimney, I shall go out of the door, said Mrs. Brill, because she has to do her bakery, doesn't like to. let me go because he touched them, because as soon as the sweet touch people are happy. And he said, let me go, you Hindu. And third, this is the Helen, don't touch me, you black heathen. This is strong. This is for our sensitivity is something very hard to accept. But it's issue of the time. Nobody is ever told anything about criticize this language, and we're going to translate it. I don't know. I will try to find some solution in this age, in this era where we are living. But I'm certainly not erase the problem.
Can be a problem. When the Roald Dahl started the news, I'm quite emotional. Sorry, I immediately put on change.org a petition against the new edit. I don't know why, but you sign. Why?
I signed personally, first of all.
Yeah.
I signed personally because this is my opinion. So I didn't want to. I told you I will sign. Salani, my publishing's opinion stood apart because we are translated books from England. We translated. We have some, so we didn't want to. We didn't say anything, as you have seen. We were also loyal to waiting for a situation which has been resolved in a way. So my opinion is, of course, that you don't have to change the text, and especially because we live. I was reflecting on this problem, which came out this year. After, I can say, in my opinion, everything is related. It's related to the fact that we lived a COVID period. In 3 years, many things have changed very fast. Also today, I go around and I see many of friends I haven't seen for 4 or 5 years, and I found them different from as so. We had a very heavy, everybody knows, such a heavy period, such a difficult period, war, and and politics, and the world is facing such a new problems. So this going back to some rules, even though we have all the new sensibility, and what else. It's like you need to have some rules, revanchist of the past, in order to survive to all these sorrows and difficult moments. So this story about Roald Dahl came out now, after years also where in fashion, in clothes, you had no gender division. And now from this year, last fashion weeks in Italy and in Paris, they are coming back to male and female dresses. So something is in the air. And just to find some paletti, I don't know, some blocks, you need this. So my opinion is that if you change a text, you go against freedom. Freedom, the freedom of Roald Dahl, the freedom of a writer. So why we must go? Of course, freedom means that you explain a child that in the past life was different, and prejudice and civilization came up not out of the blue, but very, very slowly. And if you explain this to a child, you explain the civilization of the world and literatures makes this accompanies civilization of the world.
Thank you. We have time for a round of questions from you, from the public, if someone has something to ask to our guests. Otherwise, I have a couple of more questions. There is someone in the public who want to ask something? Come on, great. Can you provide the microphone, please?
Thank you.
Hello, can you present yourself?
Hi, I'm Riva Begun. Nice to meet you. I'm a writer. I actually had a question about your thought on, for a story to survive, it needs to change, basically. And my question was that I see people taking problematic books, especially from Roald Dahl, they turn them into movies, they remake the book, etc. And why do we want these books by people who were anti-Semitic or who had these views to persist? What is the value of keeping the memory of someone like that when you could use those resources to promote other books that might have values that you actually want to continue into the future?
Very interesting. For who?
For anyone.
Okay. Beverly, you want to say something?
Yeah. I mean, your point is well taken. I think that the entertainment industry often selects based on popularity and fiscal impact, and that we can't control that. It's bigger than we are. It certainly is complicated, but do people listen to Wagner knowing Wagner's personal, let's say, anti-Semitism? Do we throw Wagner out the window and say his music is not worth listening to? It is very complicated, and I think individually people decide, is there something in art versus the individual? Can you separate them? And I think everybody has to make their own choice with that. It is an interesting point that continues to plague or to be discussed, but one would love for only the best, and yet then you sometimes learn someone you thought was one thing had a different life. So it's a pretty convoluted situation often. I don't have an easy answer for you.
Thank you.
That's what I would say.
Someone, okay? Other question, or we can leave our guests to the book fair and to enjoy themselves. It's okay? Okay, thank you for coming. Thank you for your time. Hoping to have solved some questions. Thank you.